I like to think of myself as an ordinary guy living an ordinary life, enjoying the simple pleasures of hiking, camping, and fishing. Out of these, hiking has always been my favorite. However, everything changed one summer on the Appalachian Trail. Living in Upper East Tennessee, I'd explored these mountains my entire life. The Appalachians hold a unique allure. Their beauty is captivating, but they also harbor hidden dangers. A few summers ago, I decided to tackle the entire Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine. My friends, who often joked about those who took on such a journey, weren't interested in joining me. We had grown up surrounded by these mountains, picking wild berries and hunting for ginseng, treating the outdoors as a regular part of life. Yet, the idea of hiking the entire trail captivated me, and I wouldn't let their teasing deter me. I set out on my own, equipped with all the latest gear. I knew the mountains could be perilous, so I prepared thoroughly. I was determined to stay connected with friends and family through social media, using my cell phone to document my adventure. It was early May, and many hikers had already begun the 2,000-mile trek, aiming to reach Maine before the park closed in October. I took my time, stopping in small towns along the way to replenish my supplies. By the first week of July, I found myself in familiar territory in Tennessee. I felt comfortable and relaxed, but that didn't last long. The Appalachian Mountains are notorious for their dead zones, and I soon discovered that my cell phone signal was non-existent. I wasn't concerned. I even posted a video to let my followers know I'd be offline until I got out of the dead zone. Armed with a compass, I thought I had everything I needed to navigate this area I knew so well. However, the compass began to malfunction. It spun erratically, pointing in different directions. My grandmother had warned me that compasses could behave oddly in these mountains due to the iron ore in the area, but I had never experienced it myself. In a wide clearing atop a ridge, I stopped to get my bearings, only to realize the trail had vanished. It ended on one side of the clearing and picked up again on the other, deep in the trees. Dusk was approaching, and I wanted to set up camp, yet I still felt confident I wasn't lost. The next morning, I packed up and continued my journey, but the compass was still useless, and I had no cell service. As I ventured further, the small trail dwindled to what resembled a deer path. Suddenly, I found myself confronted by a wall of laurel bushes, impassable. I would have to backtrack and find the main trail, which often shifts due to maintenance work. Although this annoyed me, I was determined to find another route back. But as I pressed on, I encountered a disheartening reality. There was no trail in sight. I struggled uphill over rocky terrain, desperately seeking any path. By the time the sun began to set, shadows grew longer and more ominous around me. I was utterly exhausted, both physically and mentally, when I stumbled upon a natural clearing. It felt like a small sanctuary amid the dense forest, and I set my heavy backpack down, grateful to find a flat spot to rest. Instinctively, I sensed that a small town must be nearby, yet I saw no lights or heard any vehicles to confirm it. I built a small fire and sat down to enjoy a can of peaches, trying to relax. However, halfway through my snack, I heard the unmistakable sound of unsteady footsteps, human footsteps coming closer. My heart raced as I set the food aside and gripped my knife tightly, feeling a surge of both comfort and fear as I focused on the dark edges of the clearing, waiting to see who, or what, was approaching. I backed up to the edge of the clearing, stepping out of the flickering light of my fire, tense and ready to defend myself and my supplies. After what felt like an eternity, a ragged figure emerged from the darkness. He was disheveled and dirty, dressed in torn clothes that hung loosely on his emaciated frame. His eyes darted around, never resting on anything for long, and his hands were caked in grime. He seemed to have lost a significant amount of weight, a possible fellow hiker who had become lost in the Appalachian wilderness. The man stumbled forward, mumbling, "Food, shelter, please help me, I'm lost." "I'm Darvin." As he staggered closer to the fire in my backpack, I kept my knife tightly in hand and said, "Whoa there, buddy. Looks like you've had a rough time. Do you want something to eat?" I stepped around the fire and offered my hand to him, signaling that I meant no harm. I led him to a spot by the fire where he could sit comfortably and handed him a can of beans. "Here you go, buddy," I said, also offering him one of my canteens filled with water. After some coaxing, he finally began to eat and drink. Feeling a bit more at ease, I put my knife away and asked, "So, what's your name? What's your story?" He started making strange noises, which went on long enough that I began to feel irritated. As he grew more agitated, his hands flailed wildly, and he began shouting louder. Feeling uneasy, I took a few steps back. He was creeping me out. Suddenly, he stopped and collapsed, passing out. To be honest, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I didn't want to leave him there unconscious, but I also didn't want to stick around in the dark without my tent set up. As I sat there debating what to do, he suddenly woke up and snuck up behind me. I was startled when he screamed and lunged at me, knocking me sideways. We tumbled into the dirt and grass. Despite his lighter weight, he was shockingly strong. He grunted and made that odd noise again as he pummeled my face. Then he screamed, "It's all her fault. It's all her fault." That's when I noticed the filth on his clothes and hands. Was it dirt or dried blood? In a surge of adrenaline, I threw him aside, and he slammed into a tree. I quickly regained my feet and bolted into the darkness. I won't lie, panic set in. The mountains are difficult to navigate at night, with dense trees blocking out most of the moonlight, even on a full moon like tonight. I stumbled through the dark, bumping into rocks and slamming into trees. I was running away from all my supplies, and the night fell eerily silent around me. I leaned against a large tree, trying to peer into the darkness. Then I heard it, the heavy, determined footsteps of the man I had just escaped, followed by a chilling laugh that echoed through the mountains. The footsteps were too sure and heavy for someone who had just been maniacally wrestling with me. As the wind picked up, it carried a putrid smell toward me, making me gag. Had he really smelled that bad while sitting at the fire? "I need directions. I'm cold. Please help me. It's all her fault." The voice had a haunting quality, and the plea echoed eerily through the trees. This time, it came from above me, possibly near the ridge. Heart-wrenching sobs followed, and I couldn't help but wonder who he was referring to. Who was this her? And what had happened? Lost in my thoughts, the voice suddenly came from only about 5 feet away. Startled, I jumped backward and fell hard onto the ground, scrambling to get away as heavy footsteps rushed toward me. I flipped over, trying to get to my feet, but he knocked me back down, growling like a rabid animal as he thrashed on my back. Kicking hard, I managed to escape his grip, but then I felt a searing pain in my lower leg. He had bitten me. Screaming in pain and fear, I kicked at his face, trying to get him to back off, but he was relentless. Even when I dislodged his teeth from my leg, he came back at me each time I tried to get away. Finally, when I had created some distance between us, I yelled at him, desperate for any sort of escape. "Leave me alone. I can't help you. Go back to the fire and just leave me alone." My leg throbbed with each heartbeat, but thankfully there wasn't any blood. He hadn't managed to bite through my jeans. After 5 minutes of silence, I decided to move deeper into the darkness. I spotted a massive rock outcropping that soared about 20 feet high, an ideal hiding place while I waited for sunrise. I crawled into a small indentation at the bottom, just big enough to sit in, and huddled there, trying to calm my ragged breathing. As the wind blew, I imagined I could hear that man creeping through the forest, circling my hiding spot. When the wind died down, the sounds faded, and I convinced myself it was just my imagination. I was probably safe. There was no way he could have tracked me here. Eventually, I fished my cell phone out of my pocket and turned it toward the rock, curling into a fetal position to hide the light. My hand shook so badly, I nearly dropped it. The brightness of the screen was blinding in the dark forest, so I dimmed it as much as I could. But there was still no signal. I held the phone in front of my face, desperately willing it to pick up even a sliver of reception so I could send a quick text to my older brother, but it was no use. I was utterly alone, with something hunting me in the woods. Turning my head toward the forest, I pressed the button to darken the screen. Just then, I froze in horror. The madman had somehow crept up on me while I was distracted. and he was staring at me from the edge of my shelter. His wild eyes glowed with madness, and his wide grin was full of chipped, dirty teeth, fresh blood streaking his face where I had kicked him. Then everything went dark. My lungs felt like they were refusing to pull in air, and my heart raced as if it were about to burst. My body tingled with pins and needles as his hand raked down the side of my face, his jagged nails tearing at my skin. "It's all her fault," he hissed, his voice low at first, but growing louder and more frantic with each word, sounding less human with every syllable, like a churning gravel pit instead of a man. Without wasting a second, I twisted my body, searching for another escape. His scream echoed as I bolted up the mountainside, my feet pounding against the ground. I ran until I tumbled into a large ravine, and instead of trying to climb back up, I turned downhill, sprinting as fast as I could. I have no idea how far I ran before I stopped hearing his chilling cries. Eventually, silence enveloped me, and I kept moving, panic driving me onward, crashing through trees and stumbling over rocks until I found an old logging road. The soft, peachy glow of dawn began to light the sky to the east, prompting me to slow down to a jog. As I rounded a steep curve, I heard voices. A group of men stood around a large map laid out on the hood of a truck. Relief washed over me as I ran toward them, spilling my story about the madman. My tale was interrupted by a long, grating scream echoing from up the mountain. "That's him! He followed me here!" I exclaimed, darting behind one of the trucks, watching for him to appear. One of the rangers ordered the others to set out in search of the man. Then he approached me, saying, "Son, I want you to calm down." He motioned for me to get into the truck. "Let's get you checked out at the hospital." Without hesitation, I climbed in, eager to be away from the mountain. Once we were on a paved road, I asked, "Why were you all gathered out there anyway?" The ranger replied, "We were forming a search party for a man who escaped from a mental institution over a week ago. He's been hiding up there and terrorizing some hikers. One man wasn't as lucky as you. He died from his injuries, and his wife is still missing." My blood ran cold. "That man killed him?" I asked, horrified. The ranger nodded grimly. "He was placed in the institution because he hears voices that tell him to do things. One of those voices is his mother, rumored to be a mountain witch. She supposedly refuses to let him rest until he brings her a person to possess, so she can return to life. She torments him, won't let him eat, and causes him pain every time he fails." He paused, glancing my way. He believes he must consume his victims to allow her to possess their bodies because she's in spirit form inside of him. My body went numb, and my mind reeled. So that's why he kept yelling that it was all her fault. He thought he was going to eat me to try to bring back his dead grandmother. The ranger drove in silence, his eyes focused on the road as I stared out the window, the events of the night replaying in my mind. The sun was rising higher, casting a warm glow over the landscape, but I felt a chill that nothing could shake. I was finally safe, yet the memory of that madman lingered, clawing at the edges of my thoughts. When we arrived at the hospital, the ranger parked and turned to me, his expression serious. "Let's get you checked out. You might be shaken up, but you'll be all right." I nodded, grateful yet overwhelmed. The nurses rushed me inside, and I was swept away into a flurry of activity. They asked questions, checking for any injuries, even though I didn't have visible wounds. I could feel the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, my heart racing as they cleaned the scratches on my face and offered me water. Once I was settled, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a nearby window. My face was pale, eyes wide and haunted. I couldn't shake the feeling that the madman was still lurking somewhere out there, waiting for another chance. After what felt like an eternity, the ranger returned, leaning against the doorframe. "You're safe now. We're going to find that man and make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else." I appreciated his reassurance, but I knew that the memory of the night would haunt me forever. "Will he be caught?" I asked, my voice trembling. The ranger nodded, his demeanor steady. "We'll do everything we can. You did the right thing by coming here. Now it's our turn to protect others from him." As he spoke, I realized I had narrowly escaped a fate that could have been far worse. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, trying to calm the storm inside. I was alive, and for now, that was enough. As I sat there, I felt a flicker of hope. I would tell my story, warn others about the dangers that lurked in the woods, and maybe, just maybe, I could find some peace again. The ranger stood with me, a silent guardian against the darkness I had faced, ready to confront whatever came next.